Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Sienna, and today I'm going to be talking about this book, A Little Life. I read this book about 2 years ago, and I've really had time to cope with it because it was a traumatizing experience. It's about 800 pages, and there's a lot of content, and I've had a lot of time to really think about my opinions on it, read other people's opinions on it. I just have a lot to say, so let's just get into it. So the book begins with 4 characters, Jude, JB, Malcolm, and Wilhelm, and they're all in their early 20s. They're all friends, they all met in college, and they all live in New York City. And the book immediately just initially pulls you into the lives of each of these characters, and it gives you so many details. You know about like the childhood of each character. It talks about the relationship they have with each other, the way they view each other, their careers, each of their routines. It even talks about like the food they eat. It's very, very versatile, and personally, that's something I really liked about the book, especially since the writing is so good. It made it feel more realistic. And then eventually the book kind of centers more on Jude as the main character. And it sort of frames Jude to have this kind of enigmatic persona, like he has all these secrets, he has all these things from his past that he doesn't reveal, and throughout the entire novel, his past is slowly revealed, while simultaneously showing how his past affects every aspect of his present life, how it affects his relationship with his friends, how it affects his career, his inner monologue, the way he sees himself, all of these things. Just like the book goes into so much detail about so many things, it goes into a lot of detail about the trauma that Jude did face in his past. It's very serious topics: sexual assault, physical assault, self-harm, child abuse. First thing is that I think a lot of people I saw said that one person facing all of that trauma is just unrealistic. It can't happen to one person. I couldn't disagree more. Yes, it's not something that happens to everyone or that happens to most, but however, the things that Jude faced in his life happen. I think it's kind of a sheltered view. People in positions of power take advantage of vulnerability, and in the novel, Jude was in a position of vulnerability and Brother Luke had power over him. Another thing that I wanted to discuss is this level of graphic detail desensitizing readers to the topics being discussed. I think in order for content to desensitize the person reading or watching the content, it has to be unrealistic. It has to be glamorizing it, romanticizing it, using it for enjoyment through shock value or entertainment, and it has to just be for enjoyment. Whereas if the topic is accurately represented, that's what determines whether it's exploiting these topics or not. You know, a lot of people called this book trauma porn, and trauma porn is basically just content about trauma just for enjoyment. Like I was saying, maybe it's provides a level of catharsis, maybe it's romanticizing and it's providing entertainment. Whatever it is, there's so much trauma porn nowadays. I mean, everyone is desensitized. I can name 10 trending movies, shows right now that are just using these topics, exploiting these topics, and they're not accurately representing these topics. And I don't think this book should have been labeled that to the extent it was. I don't consider it to be trauma porn because the story went into all details of Jude. It encompassed an entire life. It went into Jude's deepest thoughts, his vices, the things he did to keep himself busy, his shame, the way his inability to open up and be vulnerable, the way it took form, the way he presented himself to his friends, to his family, all of these things. I'm going to read a quote. "You were treated horribly. You came out on the other end. You were always you." On and on Wilhelm talks, chanting him back to himself, and in the daytime, sometimes days later, he remembers pieces of what Wilhelm has said and holds them close to him, as much as for what he said as for what he didn't, for how he hadn't defined him. But in the nighttime he is too terrified, he is too lost to recognize this. His panic is too real, too consuming. "And who are you?" he asks, looking at the man who is holding him, who is describing someone he doesn't recognize, someone who seems to have so much, someone who seems like such an enviable, beloved person. "Who are you?" The man has an answer to his question as well. "I'm Wilhelm Ragnarsson," he says, "and I will never let you go." Here's one more quote. Always he wonders why and how he has let 4 months, months increasingly distant from him, so affect him, so alter his life. But then he might as well ask, as he often does, why he has let the first 15 years of his life so dictate the past 28. He has been lucky beyond measure. He has an adulthood that people dream about. Why then does he insist on revisiting and replaying events that happened so long ago? Why can he not simply take pleasure in his present? Why must he so honor his past? Why does it become more vivid, not less, the further he moves from it? The story had to go into so many details about his past so the reader could understand why he was having these thoughts and to understand his present. I don't think the story was a happy story. I don't think it had a happy ending, obviously. But I don't think that should make it be deemed as bad, to be deemed as trauma porn. Also, for content to be trauma porn, it has to be pointless. There's no point in the content being about trauma, where I think this book, there was so many points to it. I mean, for example, the way that everything like Jude could have done to get better and everything you wanted him to do, such as opening up, being vulnerable, talking to someone about how he felt, were all the things that he couldn't do paradoxically because of that. And that's what made me the most emotional, actually. Out of all the disturbing things you read, what made me the most upset was the whole time I'm just like, please, can he just talk to someone? Can he just tell them how he feels? Maybe he could potentially get better then, but he can't because of his shame, because of all the things he went through. He can't open up, and I think that's a really important topic to be discussed. I saw online someone said, "We have a writer who doesn't believe in therapy and help and counseling. The whole effing book is about a traumatized adult who refuses to accept help, share his struggle, and form deep connections despite everyone's attempt to help him." Which is all completely true, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. I think oftentimes the people who need to open up and need to talk the most are the ones that are unable to. It's very frustrating to read because you feel like you have no control, and that's the point. That's the way everyone around him felt. I mean, he had so much love around him. This novel did a good job at showing how hard it is to know how to help someone in the right way, because not everyone is the same, not everyone benefits from therapy. And Jude, he had so much unconditional love around him, from friends to family. No one knew exactly what to do, even though they would have done anything to see him get better. And I think that's a really important topic as well to be discussed. Like, what is the right way to help someone? Here's a quote where Jude's describing how he feels misunderstood by even his licensed therapist, Andy. But what Andy never understood about him was that he was an optimist. Every month, every week, he chose to open his eyes to live another day in the world. He did it when he was feeling so awful that sometimes the pain seemed to transport him to another state, one in which everything, even the past that he worked so hard to forget, seemed to fade in a gray watercolor wash. He did it when his memories crowded out all other thoughts, when it took real effort, real concentration to tether himself to his current life, to keep himself from raging with despair and shame. He did it when he was so exhausted of trying, when being awake and alive demanded such energy that he had to lie in bed thinking of reasons to get up and try again, when it would be much easier to go to the bathroom and untape the plastic zip bag containing his cotton pads and loose razors and alcohol wipes and bandages from its hiding place beneath the sink and simply surrender. Those were the very bad days. Another thing is that I think this book did a good job at showing that no one is really perfect, and it made it feel a bit more realistic to not have this like perfect character arc, the hero. People that act like Wilhelm was perfect, no. Just the entire way he went about asking Jude was definitely not perfect when he was trying to get Jude to open up about his trauma. I remember also at one point in the novel, after they started dating and Jude revealed his past, Wilhelm still kind of tried to get him to do stuff with him, knowing full well they made Jude get a lot worse. Also, Andy, I remember at one point, Caleb, he found out Caleb had been abusing Jude, and he just like dropped him off. Or sorry, Harold. Speaking of Andy, just his entire approach to therapy oftentimes made Jude feel like a burden. Also, I remember there was like an intervention for Malcolm at one point, and it's like, okay, they could have done that for Malcolm. Why did none of them get together and do an intervention for Jude? I think it was because they weren't really open and they didn't really know what to do, because it was so like Jude just didn't want like anyone to talk about it because he was so shameful about his past and about everything that he just didn't want it to be this thing. And so he probably people weren't really ready to like openly discuss about having an intervention. But it was just like there were so many things they could have done. They could have all come together and done more, and they didn't. And I think that's much more realistic. Like, Jude had so much love, and even people with love around them, oftentimes they're not helped properly, and people do make mistakes. Like Wilhelm, he has his own issues that he's dealing with and his own internal anger. A lot of people also said that this interview was dangerous because in an interview the author said, "But I don't believe in it, talk therapy, I should specify myself. One of the things that makes me most suspicious about the field is its insistence that life is always the answer. Every other medical specialist devoted to the care of seriously ill recognizes that at some point, the doctor's job is to help the patient die, that there are points at which death is preferable to life." This implies that the author's intention of writing A Little Life was to defend euthanasia. If a book was titled Defense for Euthanasia, it's dangerous for some people to read it, right? Some content is not, it's so freaking dark, oh my god. Obviously, just because content is dangerous for some people to consume doesn't mean that it's bad. Of course, it's dangerous for some people to read a book defending euthanasia, but that's why not everyone should read it. I don't entirely disagree with her quote. I think it's very complicated, but I think the book did a good job at showing someone who feels like that's the only way out and showing that perspective. Just because a topic can be dangerous for some people to read, it doesn't mean that that's something that shouldn't be explored. I think that that's why you should look at what you're reading before you read it. Glazing this book, but let me say something I didn't like. Jude, right? Like, they go into so much detail. Like I'm saying, there's so much detail, and that's something I appreciated because it made it feel more realistic. Let me ask, why the freak is Jude the most talented person and they never ever explain how he got there? Jude speaks Latin, he speaks French, he speaks German, I believe. He also is like an amazing piano player. He bakes. He has a like degree in some theoretical math. He has a law degree. He's like an amazing lawyer. If Jude took his pain and all of his trauma and used it to motivate himself to like work really hard and be so talented and so educated, like, okay, that makes sense, but why did it never explain that? Also, if Jude's like becoming an amazing lawyer, you would think maybe it's like kind of a form of redemption for him, you know, like after all the things that he went through. But it never really explains that either. That's just not as common. Like, for someone to go through that level of abuse and child neglect to come out on the other end so strong, it doesn't make any sense that the author never explained how that happened. So that's something I really didn't like at all, and it felt very unrealistic and very much like they were just trying to make Jude more likable, which was annoying. But besides that, I really did enjoy this book. I felt like, like I was saying before, it went into so much detail and it took you down so many different roads, into like unnecessary things. Like I remember there was one portion where it talked about Malcolm's time as a teacher for gifted children during a summer, and that's just one example, but I remember I really liked that portion, and there wasn't really a point to describing that or just like going into detail about different characters' pasts and why they chose the different paths that they chose. For example, JB, he feels jealous actually of Jude because he feels like he never went through trauma and he never went through pain in his childhood, and he feels like that could give his art more depth and just so many like elements and so many different layers that it's really interesting. I loved the writing so much. I think the writing was so beautiful and so raw, and I think that to make fiction feel this real and this intense takes a lot of talent, and I left after reading this book like it really weighed like heavy on my heart for a long time. I never really felt that sad after reading. I read lots of sad books. I think it's important to write about these things even if it isn't a happy ending, even if it is sad. I think it's important to discuss, make content about things that aren't talked about enough. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Bye!